And good morning to you, Jamie.
Morning, Kurt. How are you doing?
Top of the morning.
Top of the morning.
As we edited the last one, right? I threw a curveball at you, and I said, "What's cracking?" and
Right,
I think it turned out well.
Were you hoping for like some kind of Kraken, like not like cracking an egg, but like Kraken,
The Kraken.
like and then you're like, that's like my trigger word, and I just start going off and talking about like,
yeah, well,
form following fiction and my predisposition to art projects.
That's right. It didn't quite, but
Yeah.
that's all right.
I didn't pick up on the cue.
We can come back. We could do that one. We can give that another try. I
Okay.
did throw you the curveball. Anyway, how you doing? I'm glad we're talking. I've got a nice tumbler. See, in Michigan winters, I honestly can't I can't use mugs too often in the house because I don't like to chug coffee. I like to have it hot. I like it black, but I like to sip on the coffee. And
Right.
in a Michigan winter, in an old house, my coffee mug gets cold before I hit the bottom of the mug. So therefore, I still continue to use this tumbler.
So, but is it the temperature, or is it the distraction? Is it sort of a like, oh, squirrel kind of thing?
You mean like I'm doing something while drinking coffee?
Right.
Well, I have a new habit. I've been trying to read I use my phone.
I have a new habit. I'm trying to.
I didn't say I was learning to read. I was trying to read more. But
okay. It is a new year, so
yeah,
there is
exactly. And I told you I watched. Did I tell you I watched the documentary on Kurt Vonnegut?
No.
And I was I'm gonna watch. I'm gonna grab some of his books and get back into some Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah, Vonnegut's good.
About that?
No.
So I'll read. I've got some from my library that I downloaded to my phone, and I sit on the couch in the morning and I should probably say it's not like I'm a heat miser or anything, but when I wake up, I live in the old house with the boiler system, steam boiler system, and at the hour that I'm up, typically, it's just getting warmed up for the day. So that's also, and I teach energy, right, in the university,
and you're living it.
I talk about heat loss all the time, right? Thermodynamics, right? So
you're saying that your students might have heard this anecdote once or twice about you and coffee mugs?
Yeah, coffee is a common subject. But yeah, anyway, long story short, what do you call it? Commandeering the airwaves just to talk about how and why I've been drinking coffee out of this AIA tumbler.
It's that product placement. Gotta lean into that.
Our friends at the AIA. So otherwise, that's kind of what's going on. I've still got some Guatemalan beans from my Oliver T's grocer. The second. So if I'm not drinking rootless, it's going to be Oliver T's.
Well, and you were talking about rootless with me recently. You had some rootless updates about you've actually helped them out on something recently. I thought.
Well, now
it sounded fun. I mean,
now I could say it because they actually signed the contract. They are upgrading some equipment, and so a local contractor here in Flint, John Mason. I don't know if I'm going to drop lots of names and shout outs today.
This is apparently the Kurt Lean In episode, and
share the wealth. Yeah, I got a referral from a friend who's actually done some work on my house and then some other projects I'm working on, and they need to upgrade their roaster, or they're upgrading a roasting machine, which is pretty exciting, and which actually has greater capacity than I was told. And so it's a gas fired unit, so we have to do it's minor work. Well, I wouldn't say minor. I mean, it's anything in the city of Flint's a little bit of a dance. The building department.
Yeah. One might think it probably is everywhere, but I can imagine that they've had quite a few different parameters thrown at them of late.
Yeah. So I'm excited. Excited to be working with a local business and help them get this piece of equipment kind of up and running and through the building department and so on. So, and actually I did then reach out to those guys. I was like, hey, can we get a little coffee sketch podcast collaboration going? And so there's some stuff
we're working on
that.
Yeah. No, it's great. Well, and that's the thing. As I clear my throat, always good for the podcast. But no, I mean, I think that what you're just sort of describing, I was sort of curious how it all sort of went down. You'd kind of teased it to me, but I know that you have that systems expertise, and you're sort of doing that collegiately and sort of teaching in the academy on that kind of stuff with your students. But I mean, what we do as architects is problem solve things like that, and we don't have to overthink it or make it more complicated than it is. But there's also, I've always sort of leaned into the idea that lean is my word for this episode. Apparently, I keep using it over and over and over again. Limited number of vocabulary words today. I need more coffee, but yeah, I should read more too. Thanks. We'll have an episode on literacy later this season. But no, it made me think is that part of what we do problem solving wise is explain how some of those business decisions that people are making do affect the architecture, do affect the environment that they're in, and it not to make it where it's prohibitive, but it's just that there's some certain things that we have to potentially solve, and like you say, walk people through the building department. I think that's the service aspect of the problem solving, and not making it more complicated than it needs to be or frustrating. Construction can be frustrating for anybody, very experienced to the least experienced. So that's great. I'm glad that you're able to help them out. I mean, and those types of projects are fun. I got to do one a few years ago for a different roaster here in Austin. And part of it was that first meeting was going to see their current operation and seeing all the equipment and how they were bringing in things, and who was doing what. And fascinating. So
yeah, I did. I got to see behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what you are still into your alternate roaster. I on the other hand decided after our last episode where I was like, coffee,
yeah, to
actually like go back to my little city and got some Grackle.
Cool.
So because of the blends that they have all these sort of Austin kind of concepts, and then they have the occasional international roast where they've partnered up with somebody. The Grackle, there's a part of me that always thinks of it as like, if Austin had a supervillain, it would be a Grackle. So,
well, we will be talking about villains and superheroes in a second here. And so, yeah, a Grackle. Grackle. It's a good name. It's definitely a good name for a bad guy.
Yeah. Does it sort of strike fear into your heart? I mean, maybe.
It strikes something. I mean, you had to teach me what a Grackle was.
Right. Yeah, they're annoying. They're a really annoying bird. So, and they're omnipresent. Awful birds.
Is it related to a crow?
Kind of like a crow.
Or a raven?
Kind of, but not like the Crow the movie, which that's a good film, but no. But
it's a blackbird.
It is, yeah. Oh yeah.
Is it? Okay, yeah. Well, we will dissect that in a second. So should we jump to our sketch?
Yeah, let's do it.
And what do you call it? Not belabor the point of the day and torture the listeners
of the villainous Grackle. Yes, it's quite good coffee. Quite good coffee, though.
Yeah. Well, you gave me some a while back. I believe, of Grackle. I think I've had now 3 flavors of Little City. So expanding my palette. So now we've got Spider-Man and the Spiderverse. And so potentially Spider-Man could be attacking in one of the multiverse versions of Spider-Man, right? You're gonna have to take the lead on the multiverse stuff a little bit, because I'm a little behind. I've been reading.
You've been reading,
but I haven't been watching Marvel movies and stuff. So
no, but I did share with you a little video that could really kind of maybe quickly catch you up. And
yeah,
so
I did. We like to do our homework, right, on this show and sound like we're on the same page. And so I unfortunately could not get to watch the latest Spider-Man or the cartoon animated version that you were suggesting, because my streaming services wanted me to pay a little extra money, and it just wasn't in the cards for last night. I couldn't had to make dinner too. All the excuses. But so as a little pick me up, I guess you sent me this Saturday Night Live sketch of a Joe Biden intro talking about the primary reason Omicron is upon us, right? Is that?
Yeah, so, it was an important press conference, I think.
It solved a lot of riddles and questions in my mind.
Right. And explained the concept of the multiverse to you, or at least it expanded on it quite literally. Yes. So
I do get it now. I mean, there is the possibility of up to 3 distinct universes simultaneously existing.
Right. At least 3. That's right.
At least 3. Could be even more. Yeah.
Yeah. So the sketches, though. So this one in particular, you had some questions, and you had seen that I had done a couple Spider-Man sketches kind of in a row, and part of that was that literally back in December had
not in a row. Sorry, I had to
not
interrupt.
in a row. Yeah, no,
because there was somewhere. Oh my God, there's Batgirl. This is my apologies.
Yeah, I don't know where all of a sudden technical.
Well, I wanted to just jump to the so we've got Spider-Man.
Yeah. So I did 2.
We've got Spawn.
Three.
And Spider-Man.
I did 3. Yeah, I did 3.
Which is fun. We'll come back to that. The main one for today, which sorry, I'll just stay here. Please continue.
No. So yeah, it was just that the last time and the first time in a long time, like it felt like 2 years, and then probably going to be a while, been in a movie theater, decided to go and see the new Spider-Man movie. And so went and saw it on the opening weekend, and then the Omicron surge after that. So
yeah, and as I learned from Joe Biden, I mean, that is why we have Omicron, is people can't stop seeing the new Spider-Man movie.
Right.
So yeah, well, being that I was trying to catch up, I was asking you about this sketch because I'm not unfamiliar to Marvel comics and Marvel movies and how they're starting to like kind of weave them together, the different characters, and you kind of have to top the last movie every movie, and so since I hadn't seen the movie, I thought, oh, are there 3 versions of Spider-Man in the same movie, and one being female, right? We have
right
down in the lower right here, and so you have like the classic Spider-Man up top, which as far as the outfit is concerned, then the dark outfit Spider-Man, and then the hooded female Spider Gwen.
And so I sort of suggested to Kurt that the movie that just came out sort of brings up this whole concept of the multiverse, that there are multiple realities all living parallel to one another with just slight differences. And the actors who've portrayed Spider-Man, there's effectively been 3 on screen and in the live action version. And then there's also been Into the Spider-Verse, the animated movie that introduced a whole new Spider-Man. And and then leaned into this whole idea of that there are multiple universes with multiple ways that people become Spider-Man and different kind of characters who do. And so that's where you get the Spider-Gwen character. And then as I was describing kind of the movie kind of tie into this is that when the sort of the reaction for not just the casual fan, but I think everybody else was, wow, we're actually getting the three actors who played Spider-Man all at the same time. That's not a spoiler. I think everybody knows that they're all in the movie now.
Either know that because they saw the movie and have Omicron.
Right. And they have Omicron. They're recovering from COVID. I do not, thankfully. Yeah, exactly. Every day feels like you're playing with the probabilities of that. But it definitely don't go to the movie theater. That's my public service announcement. But I think that it was interesting because it also sort of tied back in to the animated movie, which was really amazing. If you haven't seen it, just from a movie standpoint, I mean, love of film and then anime, and then sort of this whole Spider-Man narrative, the story was really well written. The actors who portrayed the characters were fantastic. And then the artwork was just amazing. It really spun a really captivating tale, and it introduced this concept of all these different characters sort of colliding from different universes. And one that I thought was sort of an interesting wrinkle that people had a reaction to the new movie was when Andrew Garfield, the second Spider-Man, more of a Broadway actor and sort of serious actor, that people were initially kind of not sure if they would like him in the Spider-Man role. And then when they saw him, they're like, wow, he's bringing this whole other dimension, this whole other kind of emotion to the character. He played across from Emma Stone. And so Emma Stone played the Gwen Stacy character from the comics, the blonde, familiar kind of blonde love interest, pseudo love interest of Peter Parker. And in that movie with Andrew Garfield, she dies kind of tragically. But in the animated movie, you get this introduction of this female spider character, and she's introduced as Spider-Gwen, and it's Gwen Stacy becomes Spider-Man. Basically Spider-Woman. Yeah. And so people are thinking, wow, if we can play with all these characters and these actors who have had previous incarnations in this multiverse, wouldn't it be great if Emma Stone comes back in a future film to the franchise as Spider-Gwen? Because she's a fantastic actress. I mean, and I think it would be something that people would really enjoy.
Yeah. And I mean,
so for me, it was kind of exciting to kind of sketch some of that. And then, like I was saying, in the Spider-Verse itself, it introduced this character that's in the comics, Miles Morales, who's a young teenager, sort of very similar to the way Peter Parker was very young when he first became Spider-Man, but he's Black. And so it kind of takes that narrative, sort of that origin story of his journey, and then overlaps it with these other characters from other universes. It's pretty fantastic. And there's a sequel coming out, or they just announced. So you got to get caught up, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me of when I was young, before architecture school, one of my favorite things to do was to sort of redraw comic book covers, and Spider-Man was one of my favorites to use as a source to learn how to make those shapes, because Spider-Man was always like in your sketches here, in these very extreme positions, right? It's contorted kind of acrobatic positions. And so it was a lot of fun to try and draw that when I was young, because the comic book artists that created and worked on Spider-Man's, the various different over the years, would really accentuate like the musculature and, the acrobatic nature. And so how would the body sort of respond to the sort of the acrobatic maneuvering? And so these sort of sketches here remind me of those kinds of dynamic, frozen in a sketch, but like a very dynamic posture. So it's fun to think about. And when you brought it up with the animated version of the movie and how well the artwork was done, it makes me want to go back and definitely see it for that part.
Well, I mean, and I think you'll enjoy it because it also sort of explores some of the stylistic stuff that you're talking about, and then even expounds on it. I mean, sort of challenges it. I mean, for me, similar to you, is I think my introduction to drawing was a lot of superheroes as a kid, and really self-taught. Didn't really take a lot of art classes per se. I've mentioned that before, and so it was something that you try and emulate, try and mimic, try and understand, try and figure out how to do what these artists are doing on these covers of comic books. And it really, for me, was sort of a way to, when you're trying to figure out how to draw something and you get frustrated because you want it to be perfect, and you've got this thing sort of sitting next to you as an artist, and you're like, oh, well, this person can do it and it looks great, and why can't mine look like that? And you get frustrated. For me, it was trying to take it to the next step of, okay, well, how did they build up these forms? And so it was kind of understanding anatomy and understanding sort of the figure drawing kind of aspects of things without knowing that was a thing initially. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I've talked about it as sort of blocking in the forms. And so here that's what this sketch was, sort of my own challenge. I hadn't done one like this in a while, where I have multiple people in the same sketch and in different positions that have a lot of activity to them, and wanted to sort of layer it so that even the sketch itself has some layer of space. And to do that, it was, how can you sort of break down the geometries and block in the forms so that what you're building on. And it becomes sort of a drawing challenge for myself, which was fun. And then wanting to render it, knowing it's all going to be ink. It's not going to have the benefit of a colorist coming in and sort of touching up things or anything like that. Still trying to do it relatively quickly. How do you use just one line weight, one pen to generate that much depth and a variety? I mean, because all of these are, when you see them on the screen or on the page, there's a vibrance of color, and which sort of, makes the mood, and these are just black and white. So there's that in and of itself is a fun challenge and good practice.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I think your idea on blocking it out is something that resonates, because that was one of those things that early on is trying to figure out how to make sure you're matching proportion. It may not be a one-to-one copy, but you have to still, like, the leg is this long compared to the arm and the torso and stuff like that. Those are the parts that used to get me when I was young. But so yeah, that's cool. I hopefully I will not be so cheap, and I will rent that movie instead of going to the theater.
I think you'll enjoy it. So
yeah, this Spider-Man is one of the phase. All right, so we wanted to talk about one other thing, right?
Yeah, we have a more recent sketch. So these were sort of at the holidays and related to the film, or me going to the theater all masked up and
taking that risk.
Taking the risk of going to the Alamo and
was the so there actually, speaking of risk or challenges, I think our segue to the next sketch is the nail biter of the 49ers game, right?
Exactly.
Which is we were kind of teasing a little bit about Jamie lives in Texas, but he is a 49ers fan because he does have some roots in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So that gives him his pass.
Yeah. So I
love the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, no, I like to think that one of the first places we lived in the US was in the Bay Area in San Jose. And so the first football team that I had an affinity for was the 49ers. I mean, when you're in elementary school and middle school and you're playing with football on the street with the kids in the neighborhood and you're throwing it around and everybody's a 49er fan, because that's what everybody's going to be like Joe Montana or Steve Young or Jerry Rice or Roger Craig and all these different, players of the time. And then I remember like my first football game. I remember going, like dad had somebody at work who was like, hey, your son, why don't you guys, we got some extra tickets. Like, why don't we, and my dad played football in high school and loves sports, and I love sports, which I've clearly shown and shared many times. But yeah, it was, 49ers, Candlestick Park in the heyday of Joe Montana and Dwight Clark and Ronaldo Nehemiah. And it was some great stuff. And so, this latest run, Colin Kaepernick was a fave when he was with the Niners. And now we've got Jimmy G trying to hold down the ship as the quarterback, and everybody's not sure, but you want to root for the guy. But they're marching their way through the playoffs, and they won again last night. So they're going to be in the NFC Championship game.
And they picked off a Green Bay. I mean, that's no slouch. In Green Bay. As I mentioned, it is 19 degrees here in Michigan. I think it's probably close to that in Green Bay.
Yeah, and it was a night game too. So it was like night game, second half, definite snow flurry action. Team from California, underrated, definite grudge match, and it was fun to watch. So
go Niners.
Go Niners.
So with the Niners, I mean, we have a drawing of the 49ers. No, not the.
Yeah, this is their headquarters.
This is a federal building done by Morphosis Architects in San Francisco, which I think it's a federal office facility, not an embassy or anything like that, but just a commercial office building that was commissioned by the federal government. And Morphosis happened to win the bid. And this is actually one of their early buildings. I'll do the quick history, being the super fan of Morphosis, but also in my free time.
Aren't we all like super fans of Morphosis? Like if we're of a certain age, I mean,
I think so.
And predilection for deconstruction and drawing and.
Well, it is funny because my students aren't as aware of Morphosis as I would like them to be. So generationally, you're right. I'm finding that a little strange. So I recently of YouTube figured out I'm an architect and started populating my stream with my suggested videos with some architecture stuff, and then a couple of Thom Mayne things came up. And so the San Francisco Federal Building was one of Morphosis Architects' first big buildings that was actually completed. It's not the first, but it was one of the early building projects that they completed that was a tall building and of a substantial square footage. And so I watched this video, a lecture basically of Thom Mayne, which I've seen him in person many times, but this was an older lecture. So it started with a lot of his early, even unbuilt stuff, right? Stuff that
the stuff that he did with Michael Rotundi and
Jamie had. Well, you spent some time with Michael teaching, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, which was fun. He's quite a character and quite talented. But yeah, he was not part of this project.
No, this is.
Yeah, they definitely had different firms by then. So
after that, yeah, and so the one aspect that I wanted to touch on, which I find personally relatable, is he made this comment while presenting this project and then also some of his China work, right? So he's done work in Shanghai and a couple other decent, now there's even more, but at the time, like with this lecture, he was sort of segueing into the design of this building, the giant campus in Shanghai, which was only in design. And he mentioned, but he was, talking about this project. And then previous to this was Caltrans, the Los Angeles, California Transit Authority headquarters, which was equally big, not quite the size of the federal building, but another step, right, in this, and a sort of municipal structure where you had to go through a municipal process of getting the project. Anyway, so the point that he made, which it's kind of funny, before I even mention that also, is at first when watching this old lecture, I thought I wasn't going to get much out of it because I had seen him in person a few times over the years and also very familiar with lots of his projects. I actually learned a lot of things or thought of things very differently having revisited this. And
because of your own experiences now.
Yeah, after working for myself and spending some time, in the profession, there's certain aspects. So it's sort of a new appreciation in another level. But so about this idea of the public process. So without getting into the weeds about trying to teach everybody about qualification-based selections and all that stuff, Thom Mayne made a pretty succinct point about it. He said, with his relative to his China work, right? When asked, or if asked, he was almost using this as a recommendation to the students that he was lecturing to. If you are in a position where you're potentially going to be hired in China for a project, and they ask the question, have you ever done this kind of project before? The answer should be no. And that this would be the first time this project has ever been designed, and it's specifically for you, the client. And that's the correct answer in a China situation, or let's say an overseas.
Overseas, internationally. Yeah.
International, relationship building and so on. And then in comparison, which if any, or I don't know what the stats are, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners are in the United States. He made a mention of how projects, especially municipal projects and governmental, like this federal building, are won in the United States. So ask the same question on stateside. Have you ever done this project before? The answer is yes. We've done this 1,000 times. This will be the 15th time we're designing it for you. And so it should be a no-brainer. And so the stark polar opposites is what really struck me. And I don't think I ever heard him mention that in a lecture that I've been to in person. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it's just something about process that we've decided as a country to hire and acquire architecture services, needing to have like this long list of previous versions of a similar building.
I think it's a little bit of an indictment of both the practice of architecture, as a profession, but also it's as much as it's maybe an indictment of us as a practice and a profession. It's also, like you say, it's the procurement process and sort of the outside perception, the public perception, or the client perception of, well, if I'm going to need a widget, I need you to design me a widget. I want to know that you've designed this widget before. Mine's going to be different and mine's going to be better, but I got to know that you've done this a couple times before. And whereas the counter argument is, like you say, I'm a designer. I'm an architect. I have skills. And that I'm going to bring to the table for you in your particular project and your project's needs. Whether I've done it 10 times before or not may or may not influence your decision. But should it, in my way of my take on it is, should that be the litmus test? Should that be the top line question? Because the minute you have that as the top line question, you immediately cut out like a whole segment of our profession. And then you can also layer into that, if you think about it for about half a second, when people talk about systemic racism in professional settings, or when you're layering it into sort of professional practice, especially in architecture, it's like, yeah, of course. Like that's whole same notion is not because if you've got a practice that you've just started, you've just opened up your doors, you might have worked for a firm for, quite a long time.
Yeah.
But when you're submitting for that project and you're saying, okay, they're like, oh, okay, well, your firm's been in existence for about half a minute. And okay, yeah, I see that you've been an architect for 10 years and you worked for these firms and you did these projects, but how many has your firm done? Like, and it's like, it's sort of like, well, that you already know that my firm just opened its doors. Like, how can I have 10 widgets yet?
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this discounting of your experience as well as your intellect and your ability. And I think that sort of Thom Mayne kind of suggesting about how to reframe that question without saying that's what he's trying to do is pretty shrewd, because I think it applies to a lot of different situations. I mean, and I know that you've experienced it in your practice, both in firms and then on your own, and myself included to a certain degree. And I was sharing with you is that I've been on the other side of the table too, where part of that decision-making process, where you're kind of advising your client on procurement methods. And it's sort of, if you've got a matrix with numbers and you're assigning numbers, you're probably going to exclude some people just by having that as your process.
Points. Oh man. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's sort of like this. We could go on and on about all the little ins and outs and such, but I think just touching on it, and this sketch brought that to the front of my mind. It's this sort of like risk averseness of the country, and I don't want to open up a Pandora's box of political side taking, but it's one way to approach it, and China has in certain aspects another way to approach it, or many other sort of countries have different approaches, even like Europe, right? I've heard that like he I think he even brought it up too. It's like European architecture projects, big projects, right? Massive museum or something like that could be won by a 30-year-old recent graduate within the European continent, because that's just the way they think. They're looking for kind of, there's no like, it's a sort of blind survey, right? They accept submissions and they don't look at like who's the one submitting it, but what is the product being submitted.
Or it's just sort of this idea of, if there's almost a duality it's very hard to kind of understand on stateside, where we appreciate that narrative, that story of innovation, and that, needle in a haystack, and wow, look at this person who's accomplished this. We as a society, I mean, I think as human beings, I think we love that story of somebody overcoming odds and coming up with this great idea, and like, wow, look at them, look what they've done. Think of like the Maya Lin narrative of this 18-year-old winning, the competition for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So there's that, and we like that sort of hero narrative, but then in practice, it doesn't sort of translate. And what I think that's sort of unique about some of these other systems that you're referring to is that in those environments, there's a realization that to have true innovation, to actually bring along a whole new generation of thought leaders and professionals, and giving them a chance, giving them the opportunity to succeed, shouldn't just be private sector people taking a chance on somebody. It shouldn't be just somebody saying, yeah, I think your qualifications and your experience might not be as much as this other person, but I think that you resonate with me, and I'm going to give you that shot. That shouldn't just only happen in sort of private sector situations. That spirit of that, there's no reason why that can't exist across a larger, because at the end of the day, we're still licensed professionals. I mean, these people have gone through an educational practice. They've gone through some experience. They might not have as much experience as somebody else, but they might have some innovation and passion and ideas that no one else has thought about yet, because they're doing it for the first time. And that's maybe not a bad thing.
Yeah, Exactly. And yeah, so I mean, I think we could park it there as a good stopping point, because at the beginning of this we were just stoked that the Niners beat the Packers, and
I mean, yeah, and when you mentioned your Thom Mayne anecdote, I thought, yeah, this is a great way to talk a little bit of technical aspects of things.
Yeah, we'll try and keep doing that in future episodes as well. Touch on those kinds of things. All right. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.